They came to us wrapped in the glow of distant suns, speaking in voices older than our written history. And they didn't ask for our trust. They demanded our submission. It started not with roaring engines in the sky, nor fleets blotting out the moon, but with a single message, broadcast simultaneously across every major frequency. It interrupted televisions, hijacked satellites, and flashed across digital billboards and blinking alien glyphs that decoded themselves into a language every human could understand. The words were chillingly calm. People of Earth, you are summoned by authority of the Galactic Council. Surrender your weapons, surrender your sovereignty, and accept your place as a lesser world, or you will be extinguished. The message repeated itself on a cold loop for exactly 1 hour before vanishing, leaving behind only silence, and a world suddenly frozen in its tracks. In living rooms, classrooms, and control centers, billions of eyes turned to the sky, imagining ships so vast they could hide the sun, weapons so powerful they could crack continents. The sheer arrogance was breathtaking. A demand to bow before rulers we had never seen. Yet for the Galactic Council, this was routine. Dozens of civilizations had been folded into obedient provinces the same way. Threaten overwhelming force, crush those who dared resist, and erase those who refused to submit. Earth, they believed, would be just another name on their long list of conquests. What the Council hadn't counted on was something they couldn't measure in satellite scans or military assessments. The human spirit that has always burned brightest when backed into a corner. In war rooms buried beneath concrete and steel, world leaders met in emergency summits. The translation was played over and over, surrender or die. There was no offer of friendship, no promise of alliance, only domination, plain and absolute. For a brief moment, old rivalries threatened to erupt. Politicians blamed each other's nations, some insisting this was a punishment for Earth's endless conflicts. But that moment passed, replaced by something stronger than fear. Unity born a shared enemy far greater than any on this planet. Scientists and strategists flooded into secure rooms, eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. Satellite feeds were analyzed frame by frame, seeking any clue of approaching ships. Military officials drew up evacuation maps for cities that might become targets. Somewhere in the Pacific, submarines quietly changed course. Somewhere in Siberia, missile silos hummed to readiness. And in countless hearts around the globe, a new and ancient thought crystallized into resolve. If extinction was coming, humanity would not kneel to meet it. Still, the debate was brutal. On one side were voices that urged surrender. Better to live as subjects than vanish under alien fire. On the other, voices as steady as stone, insisting that existence without freedom was no existence at all. News anchors tried to keep their composure. Behind them, the world watched footage of the stars, half expecting to see death arriving in silver hulls. Yet as dawn turned to dusk and no alien ships filled the sky, something unexpected began to happen. Instead of collapsing under fear, people began to remember who they were. Social media overflowed with defiance, jokes mocking the Council's arrogance, and artists painting murals of humanity standing unbroken before cosmic tyrants. Soldiers volunteered in droves. Hackers scoured every broadcast trace, trying to track the signal's true origin. From the ashes of terror rose a single, stubborn question. What if we answer them back? In hidden command centers, generals and engineers dared to sketch the impossible. Humanity's fleets were dwarfed by galactic standards, but Earth had weapons designed for the unimaginable. Prototype kinetic rods that could strike from orbit with city-shattering force, missile arrays built to intercept asteroid threats, and experimental drones capable of carrying nuclear payloads across space. Unfinished projects that had languished in budgets suddenly became humanity's only hope. And somewhere in a laboratory walled by titanium doors, a handful of scientists whispered of something more, an early warning network so sensitive it might detect alien movement across light years, and weapons that could guide themselves with terrifying precision. For decades, we had watched the skies in wonder. Now we watched them in defiance. The days that followed felt longer than any in history. The Council's threat replayed in everyone's mind, yet the skies remained empty. Humanity did not yet know why. The Council, arrogant beyond measure, had decided Earth was so primitive it could wait. After all, what could a single blue world possibly do to an empire older than human civilization itself? Their emissaries were still weeks away, carried by ships moving slower than light, but armored like drifting fortresses. In that delay, humanity found its window. Secret launch codes were authorized, ancient missile silos unlocked after decades of silence. Crews trained day and night, running drills until their bones ached. Intelligence agencies, once divided by rival flags, exchanged data with unprecedented urgency. And always behind every calculation and contingency plan lay a simple truth. The Galactic Council had given Earth an ultimatum, but it had also given Earth time. The question was not whether Earth could destroy the Council's fleets. That answer was likely no. The question was whether Earth could make the Council believe the cost of conquest would be so high it wasn't worth the blood, metal, and time. And that, perhaps, was a battle humanity could win. In every corner of the planet, from the glass towers of financial districts to the quiet, flickering screens of underground bunkers, humanity waited, not with the silence of surrender, but with the steady, pounding heartbeat of resolve. When the emissaries finally arrived, they would not be met by a trembling species begging for mercy. They would be met by a world that had, in the darkness between stars, chosen to answer arrogance with iron, and to send a message of its own, a message written not in words, but in missiles, because the Galactic Council had sent Earth a threat, and humanity, for all its flaws and divisions, had discovered what it truly meant to stand together, not as a helpless world, but as a race willing to defend its sky, its soil, and its freedom with every last spark it possessed. And in that hour, under quiet skies and an endless canvas of stars, Earth's true answer began to take shape. Not submission, not silence, but an unspoken vow that would soon echo across a galaxy. They threatened us from afar. We will warn them up close. They thought fear would silence us. But fear did not hush our voices. It multiplied them, until Earth's roar rose higher than the stars themselves. The ultimatum lingered in the air like poison. Even after the screens went dark, the threat crawled through every household, whispered through every phone call, seeped through every late-night conversation at kitchen tables and street corners. Parents told their children not to worry while secretly texting relatives in distant cities about escape plans. University students, who'd once spent sleepless nights cramming for exams, now stayed awake watching skies for shapes that might never come. Governments across every hemisphere scrambled to posture calm. Official statements poured out. We are assessing the situation. We are united. We urge everyone to stay calm. But no politician's calm words could drown the storm that brewed behind closed doors. In London, Washington, Beijing, Moscow, New Delhi, cities whose leaders once eyed each other with suspicion, envoys now spoke in hushed, urgent voices, sharing encrypted files, censored data, secret capabilities once guarded like family heirlooms. For the first time in history, humanity's great powers stood at the same table, not as rivals, but as species mates facing a boot pressed to their neck. Yet unity was never easy for humankind. The moment fear brought leaders together, also cracked them apart. Inside the Security Council's sealed chamber, shouts rang out under the polished glow of chandeliers older than some countries in the room. Generals slammed folders onto polished tables, pointing to satellite photos, whispering about missile reserves and nuclear yields. Scientists waved papers filled with particle equations, orbital trajectories, and deep space comms intercepts. One faction argued for total compliance. We can't win this, said a weary diplomat from a nation with more cities than tanks. We signed the surrender. We live to fight another day. Better slaves than ashes. His words drew cold stares but no quick retort, because deep down he was not wrong. Opposite him stood others whose veins throbbed with centuries of rebellion, encoded into their cultural DNA. An old admiral from a coastal republic leaned over the table, his metals glinting like defiance in the harsh light. The day we bend our knees, he growled, is the day we forfeit the right to stand at all. This battle of words spread far beyond conference halls. On talk shows and streaming feeds, activists argued with billionaires. Historians reminded the world how empires rose and fell when they underestimated a cornered opponent. Teenagers drafted digital propaganda that made defiance look heroic, unstoppable. Artists painted defiant murals on crumbling city walls. Warriors standing atop burning starships mothers shielding children under rain that glowed with alien fire. In secret bunkers buried beneath forests and mountains, special teams drilled until blood stained their uniforms. Cyber warriors rewired entire networks, testing defense grids and imagining how they might blind an invader's eyes. Hackers on 5 continents joined hands, chasing whispers through the dark web. Where did that transmission really come from? Could they find the Council's scout ships before those ships found them? Yet beneath the passion and the fury, there was always the cold truth. Earth could not fight the Council on equal terms. Humanity's ships were toys beside the Council's armadas. Humanity's missiles, though powerful, were pinpricks against ancient alloy hulls that had crossed starfields since before Earth learned to launch satellites. But power alone has never dictated the human spirit. It is not strength that keeps us upright. It is a sheer stubbornness to refuse chains, even when the sword is already drawn above our necks. So the world split, not along borders on a map, but along lines inside each heart, to fight or to bend, to gamble freedom for survival, or to stake survival for freedom. Protests filled city squares. Some held signs that read peace is survival. Others stood opposite, chanting "No chains" and "Oh lords." The tension nearly snapped when a rogue group in Eastern Europe fired test missiles without authorization, their exhaust streaking through the dawn sky like silver needles. No targets were hit, but the message was unmistakable. We are armed. We are awake. Families gathered in front of flickering screens. Soldiers kissed lovers goodbye at train stations as they boarded transports bound for hidden silos and coastal bases. Farmers stockpiled grain they might never get a plant. Engineers soldered circuits by lamplight, testing drone relays, digging up old defense plans long buried in government vaults marked classified beyond top secret. In all this turmoil, a single idea crystallized, floating like a spark above the chaos. If the Council expected Earth to beg, then Earth's best chance was to show the Council a glimpse of consequences they had never imagined. If humanity could not match the Council's fleets, perhaps it could make conquest taste so bitter that even an ancient empire would hesitate to swallow it. Meetings bled into dawn, exhausted leaders signing off on operations they scarcely believed could work. Old treaties were suspended overnight. Nations once sworn never to aim nukes skyward now quietly recalibrated warheads for orbital launches. Deep in mountain bunkers, silo doors long sealed by rust cracked open for the first time in 50 years. Around the world, whispers spoke of a plan that was less a strategy and more a dare, showed the Council that Earth was willing to do the unthinkable. Not because Earth wanted war, but because sometimes survival means reminding the bully that their victim can bite back. No illusions remained. If this plan failed, billions could vanish under weapons whose power was written in the Council's old legends. Planets vaporized in seconds, civilizations erased like chalk from a board. But if humanity's missile struck true, if Earth could show it had teeth, then maybe, just maybe, the Council would look at this fragile blue marble and decide it was more trouble than it was worth. As that fragile hope settled into the mind of presidents, prime ministers, chancellors, and secretaries of defense, an uneasy calm took root. In the end, Earth was not unified by trust nor by love for a distant future, but by a shared understanding that whatever the cost, freedom must be chosen, not granted by conquerors on high. And so, beneath satellites that blinked coldly at the dark, missiles were fueled. Launch codes were memorized. Drones began silent test flights across oceans and deserts. And a single phrase began to echo in briefing rooms and whispered corridors across every nation. If they come, we answer. In homes, in hidden command centers, in the hearts of those who would soon push buttons that could change the shape of the galaxy forever, that vow took root like an iron seed in the frost. The Council believed Earth would fold under the weight of its threat. But they had never met a species whose greatest weapon was not its machines, but its refusal to die quietly. They expected our answer to be a trembling yes. Instead, Earth spoke first and spoke in fire. While politicians debated and protesters filled streets, the heart of Earth's true answer was already taking shape. Not in marble halls or crowded parliaments, but in steel bunkers and shadowed control rooms, buried deep beneath mountains and hidden in forests the world had forgotten. In these cold, humming chambers, the chatter was not about surrender. It was about calibration speeds, missile trajectories, warhead yields, and estimated flight times. Men and women in drab uniforms and worn boots stared at screens that flickered with lines of alien data. Soldiers, scientists, and engineers worked side by side, fueled by caffeine, exhaustion, and a determination so deep it hummed in the recycled air. They had one goal: to turn humanity's desperation into a message no council of cosmic emperors could ignore. The world had never seen such quiet urgency. In the Pacific, nuclear submarines silently shifted position, each carrying payloads that had slept beneath waves for decades, their hulls sweating salt and secrets. In Siberia, silo doors grown open like ancient jaws, revealing missiles taller than city buildings, their white paint stained by years of silence. And on converted launch pads once built to send satellites and astronauts to orbit, crews in reflective vests and helmets loaded prototype warheads onto rockets that had never been tested in real combat. But this wasn't madness. This was mathematics. Every target had been chosen with the care of a surgeon's scalpel. Council scout ships believed to be observing from high orbit, relays hidden in the asteroid belt, and ancient deep space beacons the Council used to monitor Earth's radio chatter. The message was simple: we see you, we know where you hide, and we are willing to act. No words, no speeches, only coordinates and launch codes. The operation's name, whispered in secure channels, was Iron Sky, and when it finally began, it did so without fanfare, just quiet voices over headsets, countdown spoken in steady tones, and a final key turned by trembling but resolute hands. At first, there was only silence. Then, a rumble beneath the earth that spread into the bones of everyone standing nearby. Then, light pillars of flame roared skyward, turning night into day across steppe and sea. Birds scattered in flocks so large they became living clouds. Civilians hundreds of miles away stopped in their tracks, their eyes fixed on the sudden, blinding dawn. One missile became dozens. Dozens became scores. Trails of fire stitched across the sky like veins of molten steel. They rose, separated, and vanished into the cold black, leaving behind only the shaking ground and the echo of what humanity had chosen to say. Yet these missiles were not sent to kill. They were sent to warn. High above, sensors on Council Scout craft stirred to life. Alien technicians, confident in the quiet watch they kept over Earth, suddenly found their screens flooded with inbound signatures. Trajectories calculated in seconds showed the truth. These weapons were not aimed at cities or population centers. They were headed for Council assets themselves, the Scouts, the hidden eyes in orbit, and the ancient observation, relays built to spy unnoticed on primitive worlds. And then, in precise succession, they detonated. Blinding flashes in the vacuum of space. Kinetic warheads striking with the silent violence of a meteor shower. To the Council's instruments, it must have seemed as if Earth had turned its gaze skyward and found every hidden eye staring back. In the darkness, those bright pulses painted a single, unmistakable word across the stars. Enough. On Earth, people held their breath. News anchors spoke in half-whispers, tried to explain what no civilian audience had ever imagined seeing. Social media overflowed with shaky videos, streaks of light crossing dawn skies, the thunder that followed seconds later, and the stunned silence afterward. Yet what truly mattered was happening far beyond the reach of any phone camera. In the Council's command chambers, carved into floating citadels the size of cities, orbiting dead moons light years from Earth. Their holographic displays flicker with urgency, showing the unexpected damage. Scouts disabled, relays reduced to tumbling debris. Council emissaries, whose arrival had been planned like a coronation, suddenly found themselves blind and vulnerable as they neared an unexpectedly defiant world. The Council's arrogance had rested on a single idea, that Earth would never dare. Earth had dared, and in that moment, every equation changed. For the first time, Council strategists faced a problem they hadn't planned for. What if Earth was willing to risk destruction rather than submission? What if Earth was not simply defending itself, but sending a message to every oppressed world watching the stars, that the Council could be challenged and hurt? Inside the Council's great hall, voices rose. Some demanded swift vengeance, an orbital bombardment to break Earth's spine and set an example. Others warned that Earth's missiles had struck not with random anger, but with intelligence and precision. If a so-called primitive world could do this, what more could have prepared? How many hidden warheads waited in the dark? How many of their enemies across the galaxy might be emboldened if Earth was destroyed rather than subdued? Humanity had turned the tables. The Council was now forced to calculate risk, and risk is the one thing tyrants hate more than anything else. And while alien minds argued in languages older than stone, humanity, fragile, flawed, but unbroken, watched the stars with clenched fists. They had not started a war, but they had refused to be silent victims. They had risked everything to force the galaxy to see them not as subjects, but as equals, or at least as a danger that must be respected. On launch pads still smoldering with heat, engineers quietly reloaded missiles, checked targeting software, and ran new drills. In coastal cities, children who had hidden under school desks during the launches emerged to find the world still standing, and their parents whispering hope rather than defeat. And in command centers, officers spoke in clipped professional tones, but behind their words lay something deeper, pride. For the first time in living memory, Earth had shown it could speak to empires not in words, but in iron flame and unbreakable will. This was not humanity's surrender. This was humanity's warning. And though no alien diplomat had yet landed, and no Council fleet had yet unleashed its promised fire, the first shots had already been fired. Not to kill, but to tell the universe that Earth would not be taken quietly into the night. The stars had looked down expecting to see fear. Instead, they had seen fire. The missiles had not destroyed planets, but they had done something far more dangerous. They had shattered the illusion that Earth would bow without a fight. Far from the blue glow of Earth, in the cold heart of the Council's command citadel, alien minds old as empires gathered beneath vaults of dark alloy and starlight. Holographic screens burned with data, trajectories, warhead types, kinetic yields, satellite images of launch sites. Around a vast circular table, they studied what they believed impossible, a primitive species striking first, and striking precisely. No one spoke at first. Silence held its own gravity. The councils wore ministers, their forms half-shadowed under flowing robes of woven metal, turned to the strategists who'd sworn Earth would collapse in fear. The strategists shifted, cold sweat beating on skin that had not known fear in centuries. Then came the voice of Grand Strategos Eshka, sharp as a blade drawn in a quiet hall. Explain to me why the prey has wounded the hunter. A chorus of excuses rose. Earth must have stolen technology. They must have received hidden aid from old rebel worlds. Their intelligence services must be beyond what scans had suggested. But the truth, unspoken yet heavy in the air, was simpler. The Council had underestimated a race whose history was written in rebellion, defiance, and desperate last stands. In chambers built from the bones of ancient asteroids, calculations began. Alien mathematicians ran war game after war game, simulating invasion, occupation, suppression. Each model ended the same way. Conquest was still possible, but no longer bloodless. Humanity could not win, yet it could cost the Council dearly in lives, ships, and reputation. The Council's might was legendary. Fleets spanning star systems, weapons that had ended rebellions before they began, and fortresses so vast they cast shadows on moons. But even the greatest empire fears one thing above all, a story of resistance that could spread like wildfire to other worlds living under its rule. What if Earth's defiance inspired other conquered species? What if those species saw that even without hyperdrives and ancient dreadnoughts, a world could still wound the giants? In every echoing corridor, that question grew heavier than any missile payload. While the Council debated, Earth prepared for retaliation. Spy satellites that had once only watched each other were now hunting new prey, signs of alien movement. In darkened command rooms, screens flickered with grainy images, thermal signatures on the lunar horizon, sudden anomalies in the asteroid belt, shadows too regular to be rocks. Every general on Earth knew the counterattack would come. Every scientist knew the weapons Earth had just fired might be the last before alien silence swept the skies. But fear was no longer paralyzing. It had been transformed, reforged in the fires of that audacious launch into something sharper. Readiness. In coastal cities, people still went to work, but subway announcements now included emergency evacuation instructions. In schools, children practiced shelter drills, their laughter quieter but not gone. Across mountain ranges, mobile radar units crept into valleys, hidden beneath camouflage nets. Naval carriers bristled with new missile systems welded on in frantic nights of torchlight and sparks. Yet it wasn't only steel and silicon that shifted. It was something older and stronger: belief. News networks ran special reports tracing Earth's history of standing defiant, from ancient tribes who faced empires with nothing but bronze and fury, to cities that rebuilt after devastation, to revolutions sparked in secret rooms by words whispered on ink-stained paper. Artists painted new murals, an Earth rising from fire, staring unblinking into the abyss between stars. Musicians wrote anthems so raw they spread across continents overnight, played in underground clubs, city plazas, and quiet bedrooms where fear had once ruled. Back in the Council Citadel, that human spirit was something alien advisors struggled to quantify. Charts showed Earth's limited arsenals, graphs displayed inferior technology. But there was no unit of measure for stubbornness. No formula could predict what a species would do when its back was to the void. Some council members argued for annihilation. Strike hard, strike fast, erase the problem before it grew. Others urged caution. A single demonstration had already forced them to convene in crisis. What if Earth had more weapons hidden, or worse? What if destroying Earth turned it into a martyr world that lit rebellions on every colony? One old admiral, scales dull by centuries but voice still sharp, spoke what many feared to admit. We have miscalculated. Their strength is not in fleets, but in will, and we can ignite stars. Even as these debates raged, Earth's message had already spread beyond the Council's walls. Across distant colonies and vassal worlds, broadcast relays had carried images of missiles streaking skyward, of a small planet daring to wound a behemoth. To species long crushed under the Council's heel, those images became something dangerous: hope. Back on Earth, leaders met under hush lights, knowing every decision might be their last as free humans. Reports flowed in. Council scout ships now kept their distance. Orbital relays fell silent, likely destroyed or recalled. Humanity's audacious gamble had bought not victory, but hesitation, and in that hesitation lay a sliver of time. Engineers worked without rest, building decoys, moving critical systems underground, laying cables and relays so Earth could keep fighting even if cities fell. In space, the few satellites Earth had repositioned, scanning the darkness, waiting for the first glimmer of alien engines. And all the while, the Council's advisors traced probabilities with clawed hands and whisper-thin data projections. Every scenario balanced on the same knife's edge: conquer and risk rebellion galaxy-wide, or hesitate and risk appearing weak. For the first time, the Council faced an enemy that should have been insignificant, yet whose refusal to bend forced an ancient empire to stare into a mirror it had long avoided. In homes across Earth, families gathered under quiet skies. Children asked their parents why the stars seemed closer now, why everyone spoke in softer tones, why soldiers with tired eyes stood on rooftops. And parents, searching for words, spoke the truth, because sometimes freedom isn't something you inherit. It's something you fight for, even if it means daring giants to strike you down. In secret war rooms and on midnight rooftops, humanity waited, not with resignation, but with a breath held between terror and triumph. They had struck first, not to destroy, but to force the Council to see them, not as prey, but as a people who would never kneel. And somewhere beyond the reach of Earth's oldest telescopes, the Council weighed risk against pride. They realized, perhaps for the first time, that a single world could change the story of an entire galaxy, not by its weapons, but by its refusal to vanish quietly. Earth had spoken. Now the universe was listening. They expected us to break. Instead, we stood, and in that defiance, even the stars seemed to lean closer, curious to see what we might do next. For a moment in cosmic time, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. Humanity's missiles had not turned Council dreadnoughts to ash, but they had burned something older and more brittle: the certainty of an ancient empire that had never been challenged by a race so young. In the silent corridors of the Council's floating citadel, the debate reached its final, trembling note. Some still argued for obliteration, a single barrage to turn Earth's continents into glass, to erase the insult before it inspired rebellion across the stars. But others older, wearier, and perhaps wiser, whispered a risk. Destroy Earth, and every oppressed world watching those broadcasts might rise next. The Council had ruled through fear longer than humans had known the shape of the wheel. But fear is a dangerous servant. Once it slips, it can turn its master into the hunted. And in those precious hours of hesitation, something unexpected happened. Humanity did not wait cowering in the dark. It built, it planned, it dared to hope. In hidden bunkers beneath mountain roots, generals watched the radar screens, each blip a promise of life or death. Engineers in oil-stained overalls welded new plates onto missile casings, sweat rolling down tired faces. Software teams tested guidance systems until their eyes burned from the glow of monitors. Every tool, every trick, every scrap of knowledge humanity had gathered across centuries, all pressed into service, not to conquer, but to survive with head held high. On city streets, the mood was no longer only fear. It was determination, raw and stubborn. Street artists painted over broken walls, a human silhouette, fists clenched, facing a looming alien titan, and above it, a single word in a dozen languages: resist. Parents whispered truths to their children by lamplight. That courage does not mean the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. And in small clubs, cramped apartments, and public squares, voices rose in quiet songs about freedom. Words carried by trembling voices that grew stronger each night. Far beyond Earth's skies, the Council's emissaries floated closer, their ships ancient as myths, hulls etched with the history of conquered worlds. But as they approached, their scanners saw something new. Fresh launch sites, decoy satellites, heat signatures spread across continents. The humans had not hidden, they had prepared. In Council command chambers, an old strategist, once a hero of a war so long past his name was now forgotten, spoke in a voice graveled by centuries. They do not plan to survive. They plan to be remembered. In that moment, the Council saw it clearly. Victory was still possible, but it would be costly, bloody, and worse, legendary. And legends are the seeds of rebellion. While the alien rulers hesitated, humanity turned fear into fire. In a coastal city, an old shipyard once rusting under salt winds roared to life, cranes lifting missile parts like steel bones reborn. In desert bunkers, drones were fueled and armed, ready to rise into the thin dawn air at the first sign of invasion. Across thousands of screens, from submarines prowling the deep to command centers beneath frozen tundra, a single silent prayer pulsed. Let them see we do not kneel. And so, dawn after dawn, Earth waited. The expected rain of alien fire never came. Instead, the Council scouts slowed, pulled back, and then, one by one, disappeared beyond the edge of human scanners. The sky stayed quiet. The sea stayed calm. And on every continent, watchers looked at blank radar screens and dared to breathe. No declaration was issued. No apology was offered. The Council's transmission, once broadcast to every corner of the planet, was never repeated. The ultimatum faded from public memory screens, replaced by new headlines. Council fleet retreats. Humanity stands firm. The day the Earth spoke back. Across the galaxy, in markets and cantinas on worlds Earth had never seen, whispers spread. Stories of a defiant planet whose people fired not just weapons, but a warning so fierce it made conquerors pause. For every world living under the Council's banners, those stories were seeds. Fragile, scattered by rumor, but alive. Back home, the price of defiance was still paid. Sleepless nights, economies strained by emergency spending, soldiers stationed on lonely outposts with nothing but cold wind and radio static. But in hearts across Earth, fear had changed shape. It had become something rarer, harder to kill: pride. People spoke of the missiles not as weapons of war, but as words carved in fire across the night sky. Artists captured that moment. White-hot trails rising into darkness, a small world shouting into silence of space. Musicians wrote ballads, not conquest, but standing tall against giants. And quietly, almost invisibly, Earth changed. Old rivalries dimmed. Nations who had once eyed each other with suspicion now shared intelligence, research, and hope. New treaties were drafted, signed not out of convenience, but out of shared memory of standing together against the abyss. The message sent in missiles had done what centuries of diplomacy had failed to do. It reminded humanity of what it could be when united, not by fear of each other, but by the refusal to be anyone's prey. The Council still held power across the stars. Its fleets still blotted out suns and other skies. But in its chambers of polished stone and dark alloy, a new word entered quiet conversations. Earth. Spoken not as a target to be crushed, but as a force to be reckoned with, dangerous, unpredictable, and perhaps, if respected, a partner instead of an enemy. For Earth, the greatest victory was not in forcing an empire to retreat, but in discovering itself. That under the weight of impossible odds, humanity's greatest weapon was not the missiles built in secret, but the iron will that launched them. And so, under the same stars that had once seemed so cold and unreachable, a single blue world stood unbroken. They had sent us a threat. We had answered with a warning, in flame, steel, and unyielding defiance. And somewhere beyond human eyes, even the galaxy itself seemed to nod in quiet respect. For the first time in its long memory, the Galactic Council had not simply found another world to rule. It had found a world willing to stand. And in that moment, Earth was no longer just another planet. It was a promise written in fire, that even the smallest voice can echo across the stars.